All right, ready to dive deep with us
Uh-huh.
into one of the most enduring stories in history.
Yeah.
The Exodus.
Okay.
We're exploring excerpts from the Exodus, the liberation of the people of Israel.
Right.
We're going to uncover why this story of liberation and faith
Sure.
continues to resonate thousands of years later.
It's a story that has shaped not only Judaism, but
Yeah.
also Christianity and Islam.
Wow.
It's influenced everything from our concepts of justice and freedom to artistic expressions and social movements.
Yeah, it's a story with so many layers.
Oh, yeah?
And it all begins with the Israelites living in Egypt.
Right.
Not as slaves initially,
No.
but because of Joseph saving Egypt from that famine.
Exactly, Joseph's family. The Israelites were welcomed into Egypt,
Okay.
but over time,
Yeah.
a new pharaoh came to power
Oh.
who didn't remember Joseph
Mm.
or all the good that he'd done.
Right.
And this pharaoh saw the growing Israelite population as a threat
Mm-hmm.
and enslaved them, forcing them into brutal labor.
And it's in this backdrop of oppression that we see the story of Moses unfold.
Exactly.
What I find so fascinating is that he's raised in the Pharaoh's court.
Right in the lap of luxury.
Talk about an identity crisis.
Surrounded by the very people oppressing his own kin.
Yeah.
It's like his life is a microcosm of the tension between the Israelites and the Egyptians.
Right.
This duality comes to a head when he kills an Egyptian guard,
Oh, wow.
mistreating a Hebrew,
Okay.
forcing him to flee into exile.
It's in exile that he encounters God.
Yes.
Through the burning bush.
At Mount Horeb.
Right.
It's a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Imagine a seemingly ordinary shepherd encountering the divine
Yeah.
through a bush that burns but is not consumed.
Wow.
An image loaded with symbolism, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And God tasks Moses
Yeah.
with returning to Egypt to free the Israelites.
Right?
Now, I know that Moses was considered a prophet, but was this a common way for God to communicate with people back then?
It's certainly portrayed as an extraordinary event,
Mhm.
a clear demonstration of God's power
Right.
and a personal call to action for Moses.
Right?
It raises a question, though, about divine intervention.
Yeah.
How did people in the ancient world understand and interpret these kinds of events?
It makes you wonder if people back then
Yeah.
were more likely to just accept the supernatural as part of everyday life.
Right.
But either way, this encounter sets the stage
Yes.
for Moses' confrontation with the Pharaoh,
Right.
leading to one of the most iconic parts of the Exodus story,
Of course.
the plagues.
These weren't just random acts of chaos.
Right.
The plagues were designed to demonstrate Yahweh's power over the Egyptian gods,
Okay.
each one targeting a specific aspect of Egyptian life and belief.
Like the Nile turning into blood.
Exactly.
That's a pretty vivid image.
Yes.
Was that meant to be taken literally?
Well,
Or could it be a symbolic attack on the Nile god Hapi,
uh-huh.
who was considered the source of life and fertility in Egypt?
That's the beauty of these narratives.
Mm-hmm.
They operate on multiple levels,
Okay.
inviting us to consider both the literal and symbolic interpretation.
So do we know for sure?
Well, some scholars suggest
Okay.
the plagues could have been natural phenomena,
Okay.
like red algae blooms in the Nile,
Hmm.
that were then interpreted as divine acts.
It's interesting to consider how people of that time
Oh, yeah.
would have experienced and interpreted those events,
Right.
especially those who weren't even directly involved.
Of course.
I can only imagine the fear and awe
Oh, yeah.
that they must have felt.
For sure.
And of course, we can't forget the frogs, the lice and the flies.
Right.
I mean, even for a modern audience,
Yeah.
those plagues just feel viscerally unsettling.
Imagine the disruption to daily life,
Right.
the sense of powerlessness
Mhm.
in the face of these infestations.
Yeah,
Each plague intensified the pressure on Pharaoh,
right.
yet he remained stubbornly resistant.
It makes you wonder about the nature of power
Yeah.
and how it can blind people to reason and compassion.
It's a classic case of my way or the highway,
Right.
even when the highway is literally crawling with frogs and flies.
But I'm curious, did the Israelites themselves suffer during the plagues?
What?
Or were they completely protected?
The text suggests that the Israelites were spared from the worst of the plagues, highlighting the idea of divine favoritism and protection.
Okay.
But this raises some complex theological questions.
Right.
about the nature of God's justice and mercy.
It does make you think about how those concepts were understood in ancient times.
For sure.
But ultimately, it was the 10th plague,
Of course.
the death of the firstborn,
Yes.
that finally broke Pharaoh's will.
Right.
It's a heart-wrenching part of the story.
Yeah.
Even with the Israelites being spared through the Passover ritual.
The Passover, with its symbolism of blood and sacrifice, becomes a defining ritual for the Israelites, separating them from the Egyptians,
Right.
and underscoring their special relationship with God.
Right.
But the institution of Passover also raises questions
Yeah.
about the morality of collective punishment,
Yeah.
even if it served a larger purpose.
Right.
The death of innocent children is a difficult concept to reconcile.
It definitely challenges modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
It reminds us that these ancient stories often reflect the values and beliefs of their time, which may differ from our own,
Right.
but it also forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about the nature of suffering and the complexities of faith.
And the Passover story leads us to the dramatic climax of this first act,
Okay.
the escape from Egypt
Right.
and the parting of the Red Sea.
Right.
But before we get to that,
Okay.
I think it's important to pause
Okay.
and consider the psychological impact of the plagues on both the Egyptians and the Israelites.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
We often focus on the physical events, but the emotional and psychological toll must have been profound.
Oh, yeah.
How did these experiences shape their beliefs
Right.
and their understanding of themselves and their God?
That's something to ponder
Okay.
as we move into the next part of our deep dive.
Right.
The escape from Egypt
Okay.
and the journey towards freedom.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We left off last time with the Israelites having endured the 10 plagues
Right.
and Pharaoh finally relenting,
Yeah.
letting them leave Egypt. But then we have that dramatic chase scene.
Yes.
With Pharaoh and his army hot on their heels.
Right.
Talk about a nail-biter.
The parting of the Red Sea
Yeah.
is perhaps one of the most well-known and awe-inspiring events in the Exodus story.
It really is.
It's a moment that really embodies the power of divine intervention and the ultimate victory of the oppressed over their oppressors.
It's a pretty epic visual to imagine.
Oh, for sure.
But I'm curious about the symbolism of the Red Sea itself. What does it represent in the context of the Exodus narrative?
I think it can be seen as a symbolic threshold, a boundary between slavery and freedom, between the known and the unknown.
Interesting.
Crossing the Red Sea wasn't just a physical journey.
Right.
It represented a passage into a new reality,
Okay.
a new identity for the Israelites.
So it was a baptism of sorts.
Yeah.
Cleansing from their past and stepping into a new future.
Right.
And what about the fate of the Egyptian army?
Well,
Was it simply a display of God's power? Or was there a deeper message being conveyed?
well, the destruction of the Egyptian army certainly reinforces the idea of divine retribution, but it also speaks to the consequences of pursuing power and control at all costs.
Right.
Pharaoh's relentless pursuit of the Israelites ultimately leads to his own downfall,
Wow.
a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition.
It's a reminder that those who cling to power
Yeah.
often end up drowning in it, literally and figuratively.
Exactly.
But now free from slavery,
Ah.
having witnessed this incredible miracle,
Yeah.
the Israelites find themselves in the wilderness.
Right.
It's a completely new set of challenges.
Absolutely. They've gone from the relative stability of slavery,
Right.
however brutal it was,
Yeah.
to the uncertainty of the desert.
Yeah.
It's a test of their faith, their resilience,
Yeah.
and their ability to adapt to unfamiliar circumstances.
Right.
We see them complaining about the lack of food and water, longing for the comforts of Egypt, even questioning Moses' leadership.
It's a very human response, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Even when faced with freedom,
Uh-huh.
we often cling to what's familiar, even if it's harmful.
Exactly.
But God provides for them,
Yes.
sending manna from heaven
Yeah.
and water from a rock.
Right?
Do you think these provisions were meant to be taken literally? Or could they be interpreted symbolically?
That's a question that has been debated for centuries.
Right.
Some interpret the manna as a literal food source,
Okay.
a demonstration of God's miraculous provision. Others see it as a metaphor for spiritual nourishment,
Okay.
the sustenance we receive from faith and trust in a higher power.
So it could be about recognizing the ways in which we are supported, even in times of hardship, and perhaps learning to trust that support, even when it comes in unexpected forms.
Exactly.
But speaking of unexpected, there's that whole incident with the golden calf.
Oh, right.
It seems like a major step backward after all they had been through.
The golden calf incident reveals a deep tension within the human spirit, a yearning for tangible representations of the divine.
Okay.
Even after experiencing the awe-inspiring power of the unseen God.
Right.
It also highlights the challenges of transitioning from a polytheistic culture to a monotheistic one.
It's like they were trying to reconcile their past with their newfound faith.
Right.
Perhaps they were searching for something they could grasp, something familiar in the face of the abstract concept of an invisible God.
It's a reminder that faith is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
There will be moments of doubt, temptations to revert to old ways of thinking and believing. But the Exodus story also demonstrates that even in those moments of failure, there's the possibility of forgiveness and renewal.
Speaking of renewal,
their
journey leads them to Mount Sinai.
Yes.
A place that becomes central to their faith and identity.
It's here that they receive the 10 Commandments and enter into a covenant with God.
Can you tell us more about what a covenant meant in the ancient world?
A covenant in the ancient Near East.
Okay.
It wasn't just a simple contract or agreement. It was a binding oath.
Okay.
A sacred bond between two parties.
Right.
Often involving rituals and sacrifices. The covenant at Sinai established a unique relationship between God and the Israelites.
So it was more than just a set of rules.
Exactly.
It was a commitment, a promise on both sides.
God promised to protect and bless the Israelites.
Okay.
To guide them to the promised land.
Right.
And make them a great nation.
Wow.
In return, they pledged to worship Yahweh alone and follow his laws.
Okay.
As embodied in the 10 Commandments.
It sounds like a pretty serious agreement. And these 10 Commandments, they weren't just about religious observance, were they?
No.
They covered ethical principles as well.
That's right. The 10 Commandments, while rooted in the belief in Yahweh, provide guidelines for social order, ethical conduct, and interpersonal relationships.
So they really cover everything.
They address everything from honoring parents to prohibitions against murder, theft, adultery, and bearing false witness.
These are principles that resonate across cultures and time periods.
Oh, yeah.
It's no wonder they continue to be influential even today.
For sure.
But were these laws readily accepted by the Israelites?
Well,
or were there challenges in implementing them in their newfound society?
It's safe to assume that there were challenges.
Okay.
And debates surrounding the interpretation and application of these laws. We see instances of rebellion, disobedience, and disputes throughout the rest of the Exodus narrative. Establishing a new society based on a divinely revealed law is no easy feat.
And it wasn't just the 10 Commandments.
No.
They received a whole body of laws and instructions at Mount Sinai.
Yes. A comprehensive guide for living as God's chosen people.
It seems like a lot to take in all at once.
The tabernacle itself, a portable sanctuary housing the Ark of the Covenant, served as a tangible symbol of God's presence among them. It was a constant reminder of the covenant and their unique relationship with the divine.
So the journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai wasn't just about physical liberation. It was about the formation of a nation. A people bound by a shared faith and a divinely revealed law.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to see how their identity evolved through these experiences.
And this identity would continue to be shaped and challenged as they journeyed towards the Promised Land.
We left off with the Israelites at Mount Sinai, transformed from escaped slaves into a nation under a covenant with God. But the journey wasn't over.
No, it wasn't.
They still had to reach the Promised Land. And that journey, as we're about to find out, was anything but straightforward.
The 40 years the Israelites spend wandering in the desert is a period of both physical and spiritual testing. It's a time for them to grapple with their newfound freedom, confront their fears and insecurities, and deepen their understanding of what it means to live as a people chosen by God.
40 years in the desert. It's hard to fathom that kind of collective endurance.
It really is a testament to the human capacity for resilience, but also the belief in a promise. A future that sustained them even when faced with adversity. The desert becomes a crucible where their faith is refined and their dependence on God becomes more apparent.
We see this dependence play out in the stories of their provisions.
Right.
The manna, the water from the rock.
Exactly.
It's interesting how these stories can be interpreted on different levels.
On one hand, they highlight the Israelites' reliance on God for basic survival.
Right.
But on a deeper level,
Yeah.
they point to the idea of spiritual sustenance, the nourishment we receive from faith, hope, and trust in something beyond ourselves.
So it's about recognizing that even in a barren wilderness, there's a source of nourishment, whether it's physical or spiritual, that can sustain us.
Right.
But the wilderness is also a place of temptation.
Of course it is.
We see that in the stories of their disobedience, their complaints, their longing for the comforts of Egypt.
It's easy to romanticize the idea of freedom, but the reality is that it comes with responsibility.
Right.
With choices that have consequences. The Israelites, despite witnessing the plagues, the Red Sea parting, and experiencing God's provision, still struggle with doubt, fear, and the temptation to cling to the familiar.
Right.
Even if it means returning to a form of bondage.
And this tension between their yearning for freedom and their fear of the unknown, their desire to trust God, and their tendency to rely on their own limited understanding.
It plays out throughout their journey, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It's a very human struggle.
Right.
And it's one that I think we can all relate to on some level.
Yeah, for sure.
We all face those moments when we're called to step into something new, something uncertain.
Right.
And it's natural to feel a mix of excitement and trepidation.
The wilderness becomes a mirror, reflecting back to our own fears and desires, our own struggles with faith and trust.
But eventually a new generation emerges.
Right.
One that didn't experience the slavery of Egypt firsthand. And they're the ones who finally enter the Promised Land.
Right. It's a new generation led by Joshua that crosses the Jordan River and begins the conquest of Canaan.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that sometimes it takes a fresh perspective, an unburdened heart to fully embrace the promises that await us.
But it wasn't a peaceful transition, was it?
No, it wasn't.
The conquest of Canaan was fraught with conflict and bloodshed. The Israelites had to fight for their place in the land.
Right.
And the stories of these battles raise complex questions about the ethics of war and the justification of violence in the name of God.
It's a reminder that even stories of liberation and divine promise are often intertwined with the messy realities of human conflict and the difficult choices that come with establishing a new society.
And even after they settle in the Promised Land, the Exodus story doesn't end. It continues to shape their identity, their laws, their understanding of their relationship with God.
Right.
The Exodus becomes a touchstone, a narrative that they return to time and again to make sense of their triumphs, of their struggles.
So it's not just a historical event.
No.
It's a living story that continues to inform their faith, their culture, their worldview.
Precisely. And it's a story that is reverberated through history.
Right.
Inspiring social movements, artistic expressions, and theological interpretations across different cultures and religions.
It's amazing how a story that originated thousands of years ago can still speak so powerfully to contemporary issues.
It makes you wonder what Exodus stories are unfolding in our own time. What journeys of liberation and transformation are taking place around the world?
That's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
Perhaps by reflecting on the Exodus story, we can gain a deeper understanding of our own struggles, our own yearnings for freedom, and our own encounters with the divine.
So what can we as modern listeners take away from this ancient story?
Yeah. What's the lasting legacy of the Exodus?
Well, I think it offers us several enduring lessons. It reminds us that the journey to freedom is rarely easy. That there will be setbacks and temptations along the way. It teaches us about the importance of faith, resilience, and the power of collective action. And it challenges us to confront the forces of oppression in our own time, whether they be personal, social, or systemic.
It's a story that invites us to reflect on our own values, our own beliefs, and our own role in the ongoing struggle for justice and liberation.
And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that even in the midst of a wilderness experience, even when we feel lost and uncertain, there's a promise of a promised land, a hope for a future filled with possibility.
That's beautiful.
It's up to us to keep that hope alive, to continue the journey, and to work towards creating a world where everyone can experience true freedom and liberation.
Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the Exodus.
That's right.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the plagues of Egypt to the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah.
From the wilderness wanderings to the arrival in the Promised Land.
A story that continues to fascinate and challenge us.
Right.
A story that invites us to delve deeper into the mysteries of faith, the complexities of human nature, and the enduring quest for meaning and purpose.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
Yes.
And inspired you to explore the Exodus story further.
For sure.
Read the text, engage with different interpretations,
Right.
and see how it speaks to your own life and experiences.
Exactly.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving.